Think about that. To be worn out at 17, fighting for something that doesn't matter to you, or anybody really that much, that cannot be universally seen as a great thing, controlling this city block. Willing to die just because you're just exhausted from trying. A foolish attempt to control the world around you. And all that goes on usually until they get in prison, and then they come out. Almost everybody in Homeboy Industries has been in prison. There was most of them were Hispanic. There was a young black man that was there. He'd been out of prison 15 years. He was in prison. He was out of prison 8 months, and he was there as a spokesman for Homeboy Industries. And I said, how is it that you don't fall backwards? How is it that you don't regress? I mean, I just look how pathetic my good intentions are. You ever have that? It's like, how come I don't advance rapidly? And this guy had completely changed his life. As far as I could tell, he was a radically inspiring human being, and he had just gotten out of prison. He said, I humbled myself. I said, well, what else? Come on, tell me. Well, he says, well, Homeboy Industries they have a program for everything. I said, yeah, I got that. But how did you not fall back on self-pity or anger or frustration I humbled myself, was about all he could say. Now, when you're humble, when you are not so proud, those differences get a lot thinner, in my opinion. There's a famous phrase I've quoted several times here, which says, in victory we are alone, but in defeat we are all together. You might say, in pride we are alone, but in defeat we are united. In humility we are united. And I think one of the humbling things we could do is to look honestly at the world around us and see that we are not so different or so separate. That which we had thought was something that we needed to make a big distinction about, oh, you're that way, or you believe this, or you hang with these people, or you're from that country, or your skin's this color, or your mama was that, or your daddy was something else. I mean, all that stuff, when we drop down and humble ourselves, we realize we're just alike. The gang member and the relatively privileged 75-year-old ex-Peace Corps volunteers, the same. We're all the same. We're not that different underneath what seems to be the big differences. So that week at Chautauqua, the subject matter was Russia. Now, that had been on the books for a long time, and I don't know exactly how I got picked to be the guy to be there for Russia, but I was chosen to be the minister for Russia, and so I heard all the stuff, well, not all the stuff, because after a while I think I've heard this stuff about Russia. Senator, PhD, scholar, ambassador, etc., talking about Russia. And of course, Russia is a complex place. It's got a very rich history, both in arts and music and writing, and so there were lectures on that. But the focus of the weeks really seemed to be about Russia as the potential threat to the United States and what it meant. And I think when you really get down to it, there's very little that the average Russian is making a decision about world politics, but their leader, Mr. Putin, apparently is. And to a person, and without exception, and without any equivocation, they all said, Putin wants bad for the United States. He's not kidding about it. He's vicious. He poisons people, tortures people, etc. He doesn't really care that bringing you down doesn't make him go up, but he likes the idea that it levels it. That if he can't make his country great, he can make yours weak. That was a consistent message. I stopped going to those lectures because I kind of got it. It's like, okay, yeah, he's bad. Now what? But the lectures continued. And they continued to say, and he's using every means possible he can to make that true for you. All the electronic ways. And they went into detail about how to do this. The detail got more and more frightening the more you heard how they can manipulate your thinking. How well they know you to lead you down the garden path, to be dissatisfied with members of your own country. That's their purpose. Sow dissension. Make it so that we don't trust each other. Make it so you're the bad, somebody else is the bad guy and you're the good guy. Reinforce your prejudices to the maximum degree. Disintegrate the sense of oneness that we have. That's the purpose. And the purpose doesn't mean that they're going to be getting better. It just means that we're going to be getting worse. That's all they have to do to feel satisfied. This is not something you want your country to be doing, but this is what apparently their leader is doing. So then if you take that in, we have tendencies, we all human beings have tendencies to see our differences and to make them very paramount in our eyes. And then you have forces within our country who make a living doing this. But now we even have forces outside our country who are making it their purpose to make us disintegrate as a community, to be not integrated together. This is their purpose. It's quite remarkable, isn't it? That there is a force. But we have been having forces for a long time. Don't we have groups that just sow distrust and hate? Isn't that the thing they foment? Isn't it kind of like, you can spot them, not all of them are Russian. Most of them speak English. Some with a southern accent. So you don't trust me. But just think about this. This is the force we're working to fix. Our own bad nature. The one that can control us is the one who picks up our bad nature and tickles it and makes it more loud. That's it. It's nothing. What could he do if we didn't buy into it? I was listening on the radio as I drove to work. There was a woman on the radio who was probably would fit right in this congregation. Anyway, she got an email. She asked her to be someone to have a speech. I think it was transgender feminism event in Washington, D.C. And she goes, yes, I'm in. I'll do it. I'll be the speaker. And this person, Mary Smith, is the one who's corresponding with her, and Mary is telling her where to be and says, oh, I can't meet you. I have to go do something first, et cetera, et cetera. She keeps wanting to have a meeting with Mary Smith. Mary Smith never meets her. It turns out Mary Smith is a Russian who's doing this. And this woman said, from here on out, I'm going to make all my meetings they're going to have to be personal. I'll do much more background checks. I'll know more the source of this. Kind of interesting, isn't it? She thinks she's doing a good thing, and she's being manipulated. This brings me just a warning. I had a week of it, so don't feel bad. This is only going to be 5 minutes of this. But be careful what you read and how you're manipulated by the subtlety of the internet is quite subtle. As Larry said, they know more about you than you do, probably. And the ability to manipulate your desires and control where you go and think is better than you might think. That was one of the big messages out there. Which brings me to the real point of this talk, which is this. We must be better than we've ever been before. to just be relatively benign about our thoughts about others is the baseline. We must cultivate, I think, as a people, the ability to bring ourselves to loving everybody on the planet. To see the person as not the difference, but as the unifying thing. To be at one with everyone and to know their troubles are our troubles. Their life is important as it is. Even if we don't agree with what they're standing for, let's be really clear that we're standing for them as a human being. Now, the Dalai Lama, as you know, was the spiritual leader, inherited, essentially was ordained the spiritual leader of Tibet as a very young guy. And at 15, he leaves his country because the Chinese have overrun his country and systematically have been trying to destroy the Tibetan culture since then. And all this time, he is supposed to be both the spiritual and political leader of the Tibetans. And so he goes around the world preaching peace and understanding because that's their major philosophy. And on May 10th of 2010, there was a rebellion, another mini rebellion in the Tibetan nation, and he knew it was coming because it was the anniversary of the Chinese coming in before and putting down a rebellion. So he was afraid it would happen. It started to happen. And here's what the Dalai Lama did. He realized that the Chinese who were doing this to his people were inflicting upon themselves in the future a lot of bad karma. That while they are perpetrating it now, they're going to suffer. And so he did Tonglen meditation, which is taking on the suffering of others for the Chinese. He said, I knew it wouldn't change things on the ground, but it gave me peace of mind. Now think how important it is to be the one who sees the commonality in it, even if you are the leader of the people who are being oppressed. If you can do it, then they can do it. If we can do it, we can lead the world to do it. It is really incumbent upon us to step up, to not just be like polite, but to go deeper. To come to the level at which we recognize that everybody in the world is our brother and sister. Last night I was also watched this show about the Muslims. So the Muslims are the current day bad guys. Generally, the Muslims are radical Muslims. 700, the Muslims launched out from Saudi Arabia and moved westward and eastward. They went as far as China and as far west as Morocco. And so about 711, they crossed over into Spain, and they became the dominant group in Spain, not so much by force, but by being the better people. They had taken the wisdom of the ancients, the Greeks and the Egyptians, their knowledge, and they had been able to study it because they were curious about science, and they read the manuscripts that Europe had burned, and they were the wise ones, and they were very productive because they used science to make their industry better, their farming better. They knew about the stars. They knew how to travel and to trade because they understood the planets and the movement of the planets and how you could be guided by the stars in your travel. They were the wise ones. They were the ones that in the end saved Europe from itself, because Europe was going through the Dark Ages, and the Dark Ages were so dark that the Catholic Church at the time did not want a lot of yakety-yak from other people, and intellectualism was kind of put down, and books were burned, and it was a very unpleasant time to be alive in Europe. And it was this interaction with the Moors in Spain that started the Renaissance in Europe. And eventually, Isabel and Ferdinand, the ones who gave Columbus his launch, the same year they gave his launch, finally pushed the Moors out of Spain completely. and it became a Christian nation, followed by the Spanish Inquisition. It was an inverse of where we see ourselves today, where we think of Islam as being the radical and the Christians being the good guys. It matters how you use yourself as a society. Not so much which religion you're in, but how you use your religion, what you take from it, how you become. And I think it's incumbent upon us in a country that's still free and has a very wide diversity of people, that we become the shining example again of how to love one another and to do what has been promised as the potential of humanity all along, is to reach that shiny city of the New Jerusalem where everyone is welcome, where deeper than the surface we are loving each other. And if we do that, I think it will be a healing balm for each of us. Both the perpetrators and the perpetrated upon will be in the Tonglen process of their suffering being transformed and grace being applied on the surface. We, as a community, in my opinion, sit in a beautiful place to let this be our focus, and as our focus, be a shining light for others. We don't have strict theological things that say we have the only way. We have a generosity of spirit which has been shown in many ways to many people. I think we should maximize it more than what seems necessary. Become like the Dalai Lama. Step into the role of giver of grace, so that this beautiful possibility that humans bring might flourish, and we might be part of that garden. Let us pray. So as we move into ourselves, let us see if we can make a decision to seek unity and understanding of the other as ourselves. That rather than talking about our neighbors, and this year it seems to be about politics, but rather than finding anger and frustration and fear, we find instead compassion, wisdom, and love. Let us see if we can be that person, that one that wakes up before it's too late. There is both a vertical and horizontal dimension to awakening and spiritual growth. Let this be our horizontal awakening, that we become a light to the world, and the world is better for it. It may not be easy. So let us be strong and clear of what is ours to do. And so it is. So, thank you for listening. I hope that we do step up. I think I've always felt this church had a particular destiny. And I was waiting for that day of destiny to arrive. I think it's next week, about 2 o'clock. It's pretty soon. It's really soon. I do think it's time for us to do it. I think we're here. We're about 30-some years old, and it's time for us to grow into our maturity and be that force. and be visible about it so that we might be a good example. All right, we're going to take up an offering. If you'll find your offering. You know...